Hey, what's up guys? John from S&S Cycle here. We're back for our second part on how to install the winter power package. We still have the dyno on the lift and we've completed the install of the 4-inch cylinder kit. We're moving on to the cam chest kit, which will be featuring the S&S cam plate, oil pump, 585 cams, push rods, and chain tensioners. We're going to go ahead and break down the motorcycle right now per the factory manual. We finished teardown, and before installing the cam chest kit, we prepped the bike. We went ahead and replaced the inner cam chest bearings. They were going bad, and the ones that were supplied within the S&S kit, we replaced them per the factory manual. Now we're ready to move on to our oil pump. Let's get started. When installing the oil pump, it comes from the factory like so, with a zip tie on it, holding everything into place. We're going to go ahead and remove the zip tie and take the pump apart. When putting it into the motorcycle, we want to make sure we do it a piece at a time. So you want to make sure that you lay all the pieces the way they come out, keeping them in order. And we will start with the inner housing onto the bike. The first step in the process of installing the new oil pump is the O-ring. We're going to add some lubricant to the O-ring. The O-ring is supplied within the kit, some assembly lube to the O-ring, and place it within the case, making sure it seats all the way. You do not want to put the O-ring on the housing and then place the housing onto the motorcycle. This may bind the O-ring or not seat the O-ring at all. Once you've done that, you're going to take your inner housing, apply some assembly lube to where the O-ring will sit, and push it on in. Now that we have the housing secured, we're going to go ahead and install G-rotor number 1. We're going to apply some assembly lube throughout the rotor itself and on the outside of it. Okay, there's a relief cut within the G-rotor that's shown right here. We're going to put the relief cut in towards the engine. Before we put our divider plate on, we're going to go ahead and put the dowel pins back into the inner housing. We're going to take some assembly lube and add it to the divider plate before putting it on. For our second G-rotor, we're going to go ahead and add assembly lube to it all the way around. And then we're going to place it onto the outer. Like so. And then we'll place this within, matching up the dowel pins. May need to finesse to get the flat spots. and we're ready to put on our last G-rotor. Now we're ready for the last G-rotor, the outer G-rotor. We're going to go ahead and add the assembly lube to this one and place it into the pump. After installing the oil pump, you want to go ahead and take a straight edge, line it up to the face of the oil pump and the face of the cam chest area, the gasket surface, and making sure the face of the oil pump doesn't protrude. As you can see here, we have plenty of clearance and we are good to move forward. Now if the oil pump does protrude past the gasket area, you want to check the scavenging hole back here where you place the O-ring in and making sure that it's seated all the way. After doing that, go back over and make sure you have clearance. Now we're ready to move on to the cams. The first step that we're going to do with the cams is going to install them to the cam plate. The secondary chain, we're going to go ahead and take our cams and put the secondary chain on the cams now and lay the cam plate on the cams. One thing you want to do, and to make sure you line up the dots that are faced on the cams themselves, making sure they are facing each other, as you can see right here. This is the timing marks. They need to be facing each other to make sure it's timed correctly. Now that we have the secondary chain on, we're going to go ahead and take our cam plate and apply some assembly lube in the housing here. And slip on the cam plate, making sure we keep the timing marks in the same spot. Once you have done that, you're going to go ahead and flip her over. And we're going to go ahead and add the chain tensioner. We're now ready to install the secondary chain tensioner on the back of the cam plate. It's going to go located right here, and you're going to compress it down, and then you will install the bolts supplied within the kit. The bolts that we're using for the back are 1 1/8 inch, and they are a Torx bolt. Before installing them, we're going to go ahead and apply a little bit of blued Loctite on each bolt. And now we will hand tight them in. Now that we have them hand tight, we're going to go ahead and tighten them up. Just to a snug point, and then we will torque them down to 100 inch-pounds. Now that we've torqued down the chain tensioner, the secondary chain tensioner, we're going to go ahead and flip the cam plate back over, and using the stock washer that came off the cam, we're going to put the C-clip back on using a C-clip tool. Before installing the cams and the cam plate, we want to go ahead and set up the motor with new O-rings. So we're going to remove the old O-rings. And supplied in the kit are 2 new O-rings. We'll add some assembly lube and place them into the engine case themselves. While we're here, we're going to go ahead and add some assembly lube to our inner cam bearings. Making sure you get it all the way around. This will help for installation. We're now ready to put the cam and cam plate in. We're going to go ahead and add some assembly lube to the cams where they will be going inside the cam bearing. Using the factory bolts that came off, we're going to go ahead and tighten the cam plate back up, hand tight. The sequence you use is actually forged into the cam plate, or you can refer to the factory manual. Make sure to add blue Loctite to each bolt. Now that we've gotten them all hand tight, we're going to go back over in the same sequence that are forged into the plate itself, torquing them down at 100 inch-pounds. Using the supplied oil pump bolts within the S&S kit, we've applied some blue Loctite to them, and the number sequence for the oil pump bolts are forged into the plate, and you can also use the factory manual. What we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and hand tighten all bolts per the sequence, then tighten up 1 and 2, rotating the motor over in higher gear. We removed the spark plugs from the motor and we've put it in high gear. We're going to rotate the motor and alternate between 1 and 2 and tighten them up hand tight. What this will do is help center the oil pump in the back. Now that we have 1 and 2 tightened, we're going to go ahead and tighten down to a snug point, 3 and 4. After that, we will torque each bolt down to 100 inch-pounds of torque in the sequence shown, 1, 2, 3, 4. And this is also forged within the plate. And just to double check, we're going to go back over one more time at 100 inch-foot-pounds of torque, making sure everything is torqued correctly. This would be also a good opportunity to go around the outside of the cam plate and make sure everything is still torqued at 100 inch-pounds. Now we're going to go ahead and check our sprocket alignment between the cam sprocket and the crankshaft sprocket. We're going to go ahead and take our factory cam sprocket spacer and put it back on, and put the cam sprocket on. We're going to go ahead and hand tight it just to hold it in place. We will snug it up after we get the crank sprocket on. And we're going to put the crank sprocket on. We're going to insert our teeth holder in between the sprockets and hand tighten both bolts down. Using our straight edge and the feeler gauge, we're going to go ahead and take our straight edge, we're going to lay it over the crankshaft sprocket right on the face here, so then it runs over the camshaft sprocket. We're going to measure the distance in between the straight edge and the sprocket, and this distance should be no more than 0.010 of an inch. It can be under, but you want to make sure it doesn't go too far under. And as you can see here, the space in between is significant enough where we're going to need to go ahead and change out the spacer in the back of the cam sprocket. The cam sprocket spacer part numbers are also available in the instruction sheet for your replacement parts, and we will go ahead and update that now. We've updated our spacer behind the camshaft sprocket, and we're going to go ahead and check the clearance in between the straight edge and face of the sprocket, and we are now underneath 0.010 of an inch. We're ready to go ahead and add on the chain. We went ahead and added our chain to our cam sprocket and our crank sprocket, and we made sure the two dots are facing each other for timing. You want to make sure that your engine is timed, and we're going to slide them on, and they're still on, and the dots are still lined up. We're going to go ahead and put our bolts back in and lock this into place. We're going to go ahead and add some red Loctite to each bolt and hand tighten them in. Now, using the ratchet, we're going to go ahead and hand tighten them in until they're snug. I'm going to insert our teeth holder so the gears do not rotate. Now that they're hand tight with the ratchet, we're going to go ahead and torque down each bolt. The crankshaft sprocket bolt is going to be 25 foot-pounds of torque. And we're going to go ahead and torque down our cam sprocket bolt at 35 foot-pounds of torque. Now we're going to go ahead and add in our chain tensioner to the front of the cam plate. With the supplied Torx bolts that come in the kit, we're going to add a little bit of blue Loctite to each one. Slide in the tensioner. Push up from the bottom. We're going to go ahead and tighten these down by hand, just snugging them up, not aggressive tight. And we're going to torque them down to 100 inch-pounds of torque. Now, if you are running a gear drive setup, this will have a blocker plate in this position, which would come in the kit. And we're going to go ahead and torque them down to 100 inch-pounds. Now we're ready to go ahead and put the cam cover back on. Supplied in the kit, the S&S kit, will be a new cam cover gasket. I'm going to go ahead and lay that on like so. And take our cam cover, place it on. Start with number 1 bolt up here and hand tighten her in. And move to number 2 bolt and hand tighten it in. Number 3, number 4, number 5, number 6, number 7, number 8, number 9, the bolt order sequence is also within the S&S instruction sheet. Now that we've gotten all the bolts hand tight, we're going to go ahead and go back through using the pattern that we reference within the S&S instruction sheet at 100 inch-pounds of torque. And we're going to go back through one more time and double check the torque at 100 inch-pounds, same bolt pattern. Now we're ready to install our precision tappets, tappet blocks, push rods, and push rod tubes. As you will notice, we went ahead and soaked our tappets in motor oil for 24 hours. This helps get all the air bubbles out and they will compress completely and correct. Now we're going to go ahead and put together our push rod tubes. When putting together your push rod tubes, you will need some of your factory parts off your stock push rod tubes. The cover cap, the cover cap spring, and the cover cap washer. To assemble, take the cover cap, place it over the top tube, take the cover cap spring, place it over the top tube, then take the cover cap washer and place it over. Within the S&S supplied gaskets for the push rod tubes, you will take the middle gasket, which is a smaller O-ring, thinner in diameter. The thicker one will be used for the top of the head, and the bigger O-ring will be used for the push rod blocks. Slide the O-ring over gently and insert the bottom of the push rod tube. Now we're ready to put the tappets in the motor. When installing the tappets within the engine, we're going to go ahead and remove the anti-rotation pin out of the way And on the actual tappet, you will notice that there's two flat sides and a hole in the back right here. I want to make sure the hole faces the engine. And you slide it in, making sure you keep your flat sides parallel so you can put your anti-rotation pin back in. And we'll put our anti-rotation pin back in, making sure everything's aligned. Perfect. We'll repeat the process for the front. Now we're ready to install our tappet covers. Supplied in the kit is our new gaskets. One thing to note is you will see the ribs here, which you do want those to fall over the anti-rotation pin, because on the actual block itself you will see ribs here. This will hold in the anti-rotation pin when torquing it down. We're going to hand tight these and then torque them down to 100 inch-pounds of torque. Now that we've hand tightened these, we're going to go ahead and torque these down to 100 inch-pounds of torque in a zigzag pattern. We're going to go ahead and repeat the same process for the front. Before we install our push rods, we're going to make sure that the rear cylinder is in top dead center. To do this, it's pretty easy. We're going to take our clippings from our original push rod tubes, place them in, and while the motorcycle is in high gear, we're going to rotate the motor, and when the push rods are at the lowest point, we'll know that it's in top dead center. Next, we're going to install our O-rings. We're just adding a little light coat of oil on the O-rings themselves. These O-rings are for the tappet covers. They're the biggest ones out of the kit. Place them right in just like so. And now we're going to install the head O-ring gaskets. Light cover of oil on them, just like before. And we will place them right up into the head themselves. Now that we've gotten all our O-rings in the head and in the tappet block, we're going to go ahead and take our push rod and the adjuster and collapse it all the way down before putting it into push rod tube. Insert it into the push rod tube, and now we're ready to install it within the engine. I want to go ahead and do the intake first, and we're going to slide it up in, making sure it goes all the way up. And collapsing it down into the tappet. And one thing you want to note is the lock nut that's on the bottom there. You want to hold on to it so it doesn't fall into the tappet block or slide down. So you want to rotate it a little bit and get it locked into place. Now to keep the push rod up, we're going to go ahead and take a paper clip, bend at the bottom with the rubber band at top, slide it into the bottom of the push rod tube, and wrap the rubber band around the top of the engine. Now that we have it in a position where it's steady, we're going to go ahead and hand tighten it down before doing our full turns. We're going to go ahead and adjust our push rods now. As you notice, I made a mark right here on this flat. In the S&S instructions, we say to do 24 flats or 3 full rotations. What I'm doing now is marking 1 flat so then I can count the full rotations that come around. Now that we've done a full 3 turns or 24 flats, we're going to go ahead and go just a little bit past. Reason being, as when you tighten up the lock nut, it'll turn back just a smidge. We're going to go ahead and lock these in and wait 15 minutes for the tappets to bleed out. Now that we've let our tappets bleed for 15 minutes, we're going to go ahead and double check by rotating the push rods. You finger rotate the push rods, making sure that you can move them. They don't need to be too hard and they don't need to be too soft when you rotate them. If they are hard to move or hard to rotate, you need to readjust, or if they're free flowing, you need to readjust. These look to be in perfect condition, and we're going to go ahead and add the top part of our push rod tube, the keeper. To do this, we're going to release our paper clip rubber band and push the bottom of the push rod tube into the O-ring in the tappet block, making sure it seats correctly. Taking a flathead screwdriver and your keeper, make sure your keeper cap is slid down. Take the top of the keeper, place it into the top of the push rod tube, making sure it's set in there. And using the flathead screwdriver, slide the keeper over the cap. Locks it into place. We're going to repeat same process for the rear. It's always good to double check and make sure the top of the push rod is completely seated into the O-ring in the top of the head. Perfect. We're going to go ahead and repeat the same process for the front cylinder. After completing the installation of our push rods on the front cylinder, we went ahead and reassembled the bike. Stay tuned for our next video where we're going to feature how to do heat cycles correctly and overall performance on the dyno. If you like this video, give it a like or a comment. And for more information about S&S product, follow us on our social media channels or check sscycle.com.